Ilia Topuria's chronicles at 155 pounds has been very interesting. On a side tangent though, my ex-girlfriend left me because I bet $1,000 on Henry Cejudo by round 4 TKO against Song Yadong purely because he held up a fortune cookie that said he was going to do it. And it was for that reason that she left me. And, again, at this point, I'm just kind of spilling information here. But, she did tell me on multiple occasions that she found Ilia Topuria attractive. And, again, I shouldn't even be saying any of this. I've probably revealed way too much personal information, and there's no going back, though. You know what I mean? And that's my philosophy in life, and that's my philosophy with teeth. I feel like if you don't have them, why do you need them in the future? And I think that's something that people really should try to get around more so often than they do currently. But look, regardless, again, Ilia Topuria at 155, it's been very interesting. At first, Ilia said he'll fight any top contender. Islam initially said that he needs at least one win at 155 before they grant him a title shot. But then we heard Islam's team say, no, we'll say yes if they offer us Ilia, no problem. And then we learned that Ilia Topuria turned down Arman Tsarukyan because he doesn't feel like he needs to earn his shot. And now Islam's team is saying again that no, he needs a win at 155. So I don't really know what's going on, but it does kind of look like Ilia is going to have to fight at 155 prior to an immediate shot at Islam Makhachev. And I think that could prove to be difficult for the guy because he is, no exaggeration, probably about 5'6.5". All right, he's got a 69-inch reach. He is a very small man. But at 145, I mean, Ilia is such a fucking monster at that weight class. And frankly, exactly how he's going to look at 155 is a little bit of a question mark. Now, crazy enough, though, he has fought at 155 pounds before. And the reason he fought at that weight class was because, you see right here, he was at the time struggling to make 145. So he decided to move up. He fought Jai Herbert, and spoiler alert, he won the fight and then immediately went back down to 145 and decided to suck it up and keep cutting because frankly he really got fucked up round 1 in this matchup. I mean, he really struggled. I mean, look, no matter how you want to spin it, that 10-pound jump up to 155 is extremely significant. And it's not necessarily just a weight issue, but I mean, it's almost as if every single aspect of your game translates differently depending on the weight class you're fighting at. I think Conor McGregor is a really good example because at 145, he was fucking elite. He was very big for the weight class, very long, 74-inch reach at 5'9" for that weight class is, pretty significant, and his power was absurd at 145. I mean, the sheer amount of knockouts he had in that weight class from a single punch was ridiculous. But then, he moves up 2 weight classes to fight Nate Diaz, and all of a sudden, it didn't matter how cleanly he was landing on Nate, he could not put him away. All right, the Eddie Alvarez fight, Conor rocked him bad with shots right on the chin about 5 separate times before he was finally able to put him away, which, is extremely different than what we saw at 145. And then you take the Khabib fight, you've got Khabib who outside of camp got up to like 190 pounds. Cutting all the way down to 155. Whereas for Conor to get up to 190, he had to get on HGH after his leg break. I mean, even though it's only a 10-pound gap, Conor, he did not have any sort of size or strength advantage against Khabib in the slightest. And then, of course, you have the Dustin Poirier fights. At 145, Conor knocked him out with a single shot that landed right behind the ear. It almost looked like it grazed Dustin. But then all of the clean shots that he landed up at 155, Dustin tanked each one. I mean, the fact of the matter was, Conor was not as good at 155 as he was at 145. And again, that 10-pound gap, it's just significant. Though, fortunate for Conor, he got to slide right into a title shot against Eddie Alvarez. He did not have to prove himself at 155 first, like it seems like Ilia might have to do. So all the disadvantages that could be there for somebody with the frame of Ilia Topuria, I mean, it could very well be there, and it's impossible to know for certain, but he did fight at 155 before, and funny enough, he did win this fight, but he immediately moved back down and decided to suck it up and keep cutting the weight because, it didn't go super well for him. I mean, we've seen in the past at 145, Ilia struggles with guys with really good distance management, with a lot of height and range, because he is essentially always swinging for the bleachers at you. He trusts his power and his speed and his accuracy so much that he's always going for the kill shot. And of course, against Max Holloway, we saw him really commit to big shots. Max would slide out of the way and look to find counters. Well, look, Jai Herbert, of course, is not nearly as elite as Max Holloway, but his entire game is built upon using his height, his range, and his speed, and Ilia really struggled on the feet, like big time. I mean, Jai was having so much success landing his jab because of the range. He was able to time a head kick in the middle of Ilia's combination, rocked him really, really badly. I mean, Ilia was struggling with the range so much that he was essentially in round one forced to fight on the back foot, which we know he's not nearly as good there as he is when he's the one pressuring. See, Ilia's guard is kind of like a shell around his body, so the straight shots are open, and I mean, Jai landed some of these shots so cleanly right on the chin, and Ilia just had such a hard time answering because Jai was seeing his shots and his entries coming from so far away. I mean, Jai was essentially able to sit down and throw with Ilia because the range he was fighting at was in a completely different fucking stratosphere than Ilia's was. Though, where Ilia did look really, really good in this fight was the grappling. I mean, he did seem to be very physically strong here. He eats this head kick, immediately goes for the takedown out of desperation, runs Jai all the way to the fence, knocks him over. Jai luckily was able to grab the whizzer, though, to get to his knees and stand back up. But they end up here against the fence. Now, Ilia is trying to get his hands locked, but he's really struggling because of the length of Jai. But without his hands locked, he goes to yank Jai off of the fence, and I mean, he absolutely felt the strength here because he needed to grab the fence, which that allowed Ilia to fully get his hands locked, lift him in the air, and then slam him. From there, puts him in a crucifix. Jai is able to kind of scramble back to guard, but Ilia from there did a really good job controlling him before eventually getting back to his feet. But again, even up a weight class, he did seem very physically strong here in the grappling. Then, round two starts. Jai, it appears, is doing very, very well, but he makes a fatal error that you just cannot give Ilia, right? Ilia is really trying this round to get in his face, to pressure him. He knows he absolutely has to do it. Jai is trying to move and circle. He's still doing a decent job landing some good shots, but once he got backed up to the fence, he decided to plant and try to throw. With your back up against the fence, you have nowhere to go, and that is unequivocally almost always where Ilia is going to find his kill shot, and he landed a fully uncorked overhand that clipped Jai directly on the chin. I mean, you don't get more accurate than this shot, and it puts him out. But, frankly, with everything we saw in this matchup, I do think that I think you would be right to fear Ilia's chances at 155, at least a little bit. But I mean, okay, based on what we saw from this one fight at 155, how does he stack up to the top of the division? Of course, obviously, he's already turned down a fight with Arman Tsarukyan, but frankly, I actually think that might be one of the better matchups for somebody like Ilia. I mean, Arman, doesn't have a significant height or reach advantage at all. Now, of course, Arman Tsarukyan physically cannot make 145 pounds. All right, he couldn't do it. He's way too jacked. So he is going to have a size and a strength advantage to a certain degree. But Arman has an issue, I would say, overall with boxing defense. I mean, that is just not his strong suit by any means. I mean, you look at this sequence right here against Joaquin Silva. Arman just kind of steps into range with a 1-2 that just wasn't there. The setup wasn't good, and he immediately gets cracked. I mean, his overall boxing defense, it just isn't amazing. Guys not as skilled in the boxing as Ilia have absolutely tagged him and rocked him bad in the past. The big question with this matchup would be, for one, how does Arman's wrestling translate? I mean, look, we've seen in the past, Ilia is very high level on the ground. He himself has a very high proficiency in shooting takedowns. I mean, the fact that he beat the ever-living fuck out of Josh Emmett all 5 rounds. I mean, every single round in that fight was unloading on him. To still hit a power double leg, lift him, and slam him at the very end of the fight is ridiculously impressive. I mean, his top control, his top pressure is really, really good. He clearly has very good submissions, but none of this matters in the slightest if you put him flat on his back. None of what I just said translates at all in that particular area, and that is something that we have seen Bryce Mitchell do in the past. I think that, look, it's going to come down to whether or not Arman can set up the takedowns, get deep on the shot. Ilia typically does a very good job down blocking on takedowns, but, particularly how the size and the strength translate, we just don't know for certain. I mean, look, if Arman does end up having a decent strength advantage, then the less timing he needs on the shot to complete it. But if the strength does seem to be fairly close, then he is going to need to set up a really good shot to finish it. And with the disadvantage he has on the feet with the boxing defense, Ilia would, in that case, probably catch him and hurt him at some point. It's just up in the air. That is kind of the issue here. We do not know for certain. But, of course, Arman is arguably the best pure wrestler in the division. I mean, he's certainly better than Islam when it comes to just traditional straight-up wrestling. Obviously, some people are going to lose their minds when I say that because they don't know the difference between grappling and wrestling. Islam Makhachev is a better all-around grappler, but Arman, of course, comes from a wrestling background, so his shots out in the open are arguably the best in the division. So, again, it's just a big question mark. But I think another interesting name is, of course, Justin Gaethje. And I think, look, if I was Ilia Topuria and I knew I wasn't going to slide into an immediate title shot, I am campaigning my heart and soul out for a fight with Justin Gaethje. Now, look, in theory, because of Justin Gaethje's forward pressure and his calf kicks, he could have some issues for Ilia, but Justin Gaethje is so fucking open in the pocket, it's not even funny. I mean, you look at his last fight against Fiziev, there were so many moments in close where he is just wide open for shots, and he absolutely got tagged. This was his problem against Max Holloway. Every single time they ended up in close, he is just fucking asking to get cleaned here. Now, Gaethje does rely on his durability a lot, but I don't think it's smart to give opportunities like this to Ilia Topuria. I think overall, Ilia should have a massive advantage here. This to me, is my preferred fight if I'm Ilia Topuria. And I think, again, in the pocket, he's just way too open, and I don't think there's a huge question mark there. So that's who I would want to fight if I'm Ilia. But then you have Charles Oliveira. Now, look, some people may claim that I'm slightly biased, and I don't know exactly why somebody would say that, but look, okay, I do think obviously there are a lot of extreme dangers here for Charles, but there are some things that he does that would absolutely give somebody like Ilia problems. Number one, as I alluded to prior, Ilia Topuria is not nearly as good on the back foot as he is on the front foot. We saw glimpses of this, believe it or not, against Bryce Mitchell. When Bryce Mitchell was walking Ilia down, making him back up, he was able to land some decent shots. Ilia did not seem to have the ability to counter the same kind of way. Of course, though, the danger is, as Bryce was trying to pressure, Ilia eventually finally just held his ground, immediately landed an uppercut hook that really hurt Bryce, and then all of a sudden the pressure, wasn't working very well. But, of course, right, Charles Oliveira always wants to hold the center. He gets right in your face. He keeps up a very high, very tight guard, and he does not like to back up. And I think that one thing that he does very well is he looks to land knees and he looks to land teeps. Again, Ilia Topuria's guard is like a shell around his body, but straight shots are there. Max Holloway had a decent amount of success landing teeps. Straight shots right down the middle are there, and knees are there. I think Charles, in theory, right, would want to keep Ilia completely on the back foot, constantly teep at his midsection, and look to clinch. I don't think Charles is going to be scared to go to the ground with Ilia. Of course, I think Charles could would look to be very takedown heavy himself. His takedowns looked genuinely pretty high level against D1 All-American wrestler Michael Chandler. Now, on the flip side to all of this, 5 rounds is a lot of time for Charles to get caught. And he certainly gets caught, right? I mean, that's something you really can't get around. Against Michael Chandler, Charles did an amazing job keeping his hands just glued to his face the whole time, right? Which, in theory is a good way to prevent yourself from getting knocked out. Until he just didn't, until his hands dropped, and then Chandler rocked him right on the chin. So, I mean, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, the dangers and the advantages either guy might have in this fight. I don't want to think about Charles getting knocked out too long, but finally, Dustin Poirier, I think, honestly might be one of the tougher fights for Ilia at 155. And I think the reason for that is Dustin Poirier very rarely overextends. He hangs back, his defense is pretty sound, though he isn't very mobile, he does get very stationary, which does lead to him getting tagged and getting hurt, but he has a really high ability to roll with winging shots. And of course, Ilia Topuria essentially always spams the overhand hook pretty much, over and over and over again. And you look at the Michael Chandler fight, Chandler was certainly unloading a lot of hooks. And of course, Dustin's game opens up off finding counter shots. When guys overextend against him, he's very good at rolling, slipping, and landing his counters. He did this to Conor McGregor. He did this to Michael Chandler. And of course, Ilia Topuria, again, who will be giving up a certain amount of height and reach in this matchup, is probably going to be overextending at times against somebody like Dustin Poirier. I think, though, of course, replace Michael Chandler in this sequence right here with Ilia Topuria, and I think, obviously, Dustin is in way more trouble. I mean, Ilia's ability to sneak in his shots is, on a completely different planet than Michael Chandler's, but Michael Chandler has the physicality. When Michael Chandler bites down on his mouthpiece and fucking goes after you, you may theoretically have to respect that more than Ilia Topuria trying to do the same thing. Because, of course, right, Ilia wants to pressure and make you fear him with his boxing combinations. Michael Chandler is just trying to bulldoze you. So it's a little different, and again, we come down to the same sort of crucial issue of just not knowing for certain how Ilia's size and strength and everything is going to translate to this new weight class. I think that theoretically, if he were to approach a fight with Dustin Poirier, he needs to mix it up. Again, Dustin's game opens up from long, prolonged boxing exchanges where he starts finding his counters. If Ilia can start mixing in the takedowns with the boxing, that could give Dustin a lot of problems. Dustin doesn't do super well off of his back, and because he's so stationary, the double legs can be there, and we've seen Ilia, even at 155, does seem to be very strong in wrestling exchanges. So, again, I think that you can go back and forth with a lot of this. There are a lot of unknowns, but, of course, Ilia at 155 is very interesting. But he may run into some very crucial issues against bigger, stronger, more aptly framed guys up at 155. I think that he needs to be very particular with the number one contender fight that he gets. I'm going Justin Gaethje or Arman Tsarukyan, but, that's just me. So I do think no matter what, it's very interesting, but, Ilia might have a serious problem at 155.